Did King Philip II actually visit the Philippines? It is the question that haunts the history books. The entire country is named after him. He was the most powerful man on planet Earth. He owned the Americas, parts of Europe, and this massive archipelago in Asia. So you would assume he popped over for a ribbon-cutting ceremony at least once, right? Here is the short answer. No, he didn't. But the long answer? The long answer is a literal horror story. It involves ghost ships full of skeletons drifting across the Pacific for years, sailors hallucinating green fields in the middle of the ocean before jumping to their deaths, and a king who was so obsessed with the afterlife that he slept with mummified corpses in his own bed. In this video, we're going to break down exactly why the prudent king never set foot in his namesake land. We aren't just talking about long travel times. We're talking about a legal loophole that meant the Philippines technically belonged to Portugal, the terrifying medical condition known as calenture that drove men insane, and the gruesome reality of the Manila Galleon trade, a route so deadly it was called the Cemetery of Doña Maria. By the end of this, you'll understand that the Philippines wasn't just a colony. It was a survival test that even a king couldn't pass. Okay, let's set the scene. To understand why Philip never went to the Philippines, you have to understand that this guy was the ultimate introvert with unlimited power. We usually picture medieval kings as these swashbuckling conquerors, riding horses and leading charges. Philip's father, Emperor Charles V, was exactly that guy. He was a warrior king who spent his life sleeping in tents, fighting wars in Germany, Italy, and North Africa. He was always moving. But Philip was different. Philip was an office worker. Seriously. Historians call him the paperwork king. Imagine the CEO of Amazon or Apple, but instead of visiting his factories, he locks himself in a dark room and reads emails for 14 hours a day. That was Philip II. In 1561, he made a decision that changed history. He decided to rule the first empire on which the sun never set entirely from a desk in Madrid. He didn't build a pleasure palace, he built a fortress called San Lorenzo de el Escorial. If you go there today, it feels less like a home and more like a tomb. It's built out of gray granite, arranged in a perfect grid. It represents Philip's mind, rigid, orderly, and terrified of chaos. He hated traveling. He hated the noise of the court. He wanted silence. He wanted to micromanage the entire planet from the safety of his stone walls. Now, here is where the dopamine hit comes in. This guy was weird, like properly eccentric. As he got older, Philip didn't just stay home because he was busy. He stayed home because he was terrified of his own mortality. He suffered from severe gout and asthma. Gout is this agonizing form of arthritis where your joints swell up. For Philip, just riding in a carriage on a paved road from Madrid to the palace was torture. Imagine trying to put that man on a rolling wooden ship for 6 months of Pacific storms. It would have killed him. But it gets darker. Philip was a collector. But he didn't collect art or coins, he collected body parts. Inside El Escorial, Philip amassed one of the largest collections of holy relics in the history of Christendom. We are talking about over 7,000 items. The inventory list reads like a props list for a horror movie. 144 severed heads of saints, 306 arms and legs, 12 whole skeletons, a rib of St. Albin, the arm of St. Vincent Ferrar. He believed these bones formed a spiritual shield around him. When he got sick, which was often, he wouldn't just take medicine. He would literally have the mummified corpse of a monk, Fray Diego de Alcala, taken out of its coffin and put into bed with him. He would sleep next to a dried-up cadaver, hoping to absorb its holy power. So, Ask yourself this: is a man who needs to sleep next to a mummy to feel safe going to leave his fortress? Is he going to abandon his 144 severed heads to risk drowning in the Pacific Ocean, where he can't be buried in his special tomb? Absolutely not! Philip II wasn't an explorer. He was a spider sitting in the center of a web. He didn't need to visit the Philippines to own them. He just needed to sign a piece of paper that said, "I own this." And for him, that ink was more powerful than any ship. But seriously, I have to know, what is your limit for good luck charms? I mean, a rabbit's foot is one thing, but sleeping with a full mummy? That is next level. Let me know in the comments, if you were a billionaire king, what weird collection would you hide in your castle? Best answer gets a pin. Now we're getting into the rising action. We've established the king was a hermit with a bone fetish. But even if he wanted to go, even if he packed his bags and said YOLO, he actually couldn't, because legally he wasn't allowed to. Let's organize this from diplomatic headache to literal nightmare. Part 1. The Legal Trap. The Treaty of Zaragoza. Here's a fact that blows people's minds. For a huge chunk of history, Spain's occupation of the Philippines was technically illegal. Back in 1494, the Pope divided the world in half with the Treaty of Tordesillas. Spain got the West, the Americas, and Portugal got the East, Africa and Asia. But nobody knew where the line was on the other side of the world, the Anti-Meridian. In 1529, Philip's dad, Charles V, signed the Treaty of Zaragoza. He basically sold his claim to the Spice Islands to Portugal for 350,000 ducats. He drew a line that put the Philippines squarely in the Portuguese hemisphere. So when Philip II ordered the conquest of the Philippines later on, he was essentially squatting on Portuguese land. He knew it, and the Portuguese knew it. If the King of Spain himself had sailed to the Philippines, it would have been an international diplomatic crisis. It would be an admission that he was violating a treaty he inherited. He had to keep his distance to maintain plausible deniability. Part 2. The Tragedy of Villalobos. Speaking of explorers, let's talk about the guy who actually named the place. This story is tragic. In 1542, an explorer named Ruy Lopez de Villalobos was sent to these islands. He was starving, his men were dying, and he was desperate to suck up to the royal family to get some help. So he named the islands of Leyte and Samar Las Islas Filipinas, after our boy Prince Philip. Did this get him a promotion? Nope. Villalobos got stuck. His men were forced to eat rats, unknown plants, and even phosphorescent gray lizards that killed the men who ate them. Just imagine that, eating a glowing lizard because you were that hungry. Villalobos couldn't sail back to Mexico. He had to surrender to the Portuguese. He died in a prison cell on the island of Ambon, miserable and broke, of tropical fever and a broken heart. And here's a crazy historical crossover. As Villalobos was dying in prison, the famous Jesuit missionary Saint Francis Xavier was there. It's said that Xavier comforted him on his bedside. The man who gave the Philippines its name died a prisoner. Philip remained safe in Spain, probably organizing his collection of saints' toes. Part 3. The Physics of the Return. The Tornaviaje. Now we get to the physical barrier. For decades, the Pacific was a one-way trap. You could sail from Mexico to the Philippines easily because the trade winds blew west, but you couldn't come back. The winds would just blow you backwards. It wasn't until 1565 that a genius monk named Andrés de Urdaneta figured it out. He realized you had to sail north, all the way up to the 40th parallel, almost to Japan, to catch the Kuroshio current, the Black Current. This current acts like a massive conveyor belt that shoots you across to California. But shoots you across is a nice way of saying the worst commute in human history. This return trip, the Tornaviaje, took 6 months. 6 months non-stop. No fresh food, no fresh water. Part 4. The horror of scurvy. Let me paint a picture of what life was like on a Manila Galleon. The primary killer wasn't storms, it was scurvy. You've heard of scurvy, but you probably think it just means you get tired. No, scurvy is a body horror movie. It's caused by vitamin C deficiency. Your connective tissue breaks down. Your gums swell up until they cover your teeth. Your teeth fall out. But the worst part? Old wounds reopen. If you had a cut on your arm from 20 years ago that healed, the scurvy dissolves the scar tissue and the cut opens up again. Men would literally fall apart while still alive. On Urdaneda's first successful return trip, 16 men died. Urdaneda himself, an old man, had to man the sails because everyone else was too weak to stand. And that was a successful trip. Then there was the psychological terror known as calenture. In the stifling heat of the doldrums or the endless monotony of the open ocean, sailors would succumb to a specific type of delirium. They would look at the ocean and stop seeing water. Their brains would snap. They would see green, grassy meadows. They would see their village homes. Overcome by an irresistible urge, they would jump overboard to walk in the fields. They would drown instantly. And this wasn't rare. It happened enough that they had a name for it. Imagine telling King Philip II, the guy who is afraid of drafts, to endure that. And finally, the ultimate deterrent, the ghost ships. Sometimes the galleons just didn't make it, but they didn't sink. They just drifted. In 1657, a galleon called the San Jose, not to be confused with the treasure ship that sank in 1708, was found drifting off the coast of Mexico. Authorities boarded it. It was silent. Every single person on board, over 100 men, was dead. They had died of starvation, thirst, or pestilence, but the ship kept sailing, a floating tomb carrying silk and skeletons. There was another incident in 1596 involving the galleon San Felipe. It wrecked in Japan. The pilot, trying to impress the Japanese warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, claimed the Spanish used missionaries to conquer lands. This backfired horribly. Hideyoshi was furious and ordered the execution of 26 Christians, the 26 martyrs of Japan. They were crucified. If Philip II had been on a ship that wrecked in Japan, he wouldn't have been a guest, he would have been a hostage. Imagine telling King Philip II, "Hey, Your Majesty, your ride is here. There's a 50% chance everyone dies. You might get crucified in Japan, or you might turn into a ghost ship." He would have looked at you like you were insane. We reached the climax. King Philip II died in 1598. He died in his bed at El Escorial, surrounded by his relics, staring at the altar of the basilica. He had never seen the Philippines. He had never smelled the tropical air, never seen a mango, never met a Filipino. And yet, his influence was total. This is the lesson here. We tend to think power requires presence. We think a leader has to be there to be in charge. But Philip II proved that the modern state is abstract. He proved you can conquer a people just by signing papers. Because he wasn't there, the Philippines became a unique experiment. It was run by the friars and the church because the king wasn't around to stop them. It became the only majority Catholic nation in Asia. It became a weird mix of Mexican and Asian culture because the only way to get there was through Acapulco. But his absence also allowed for chaos. In Manila, without the king's direct oversight, tensions boiled over. The Spanish settlers, terrified of being outnumbered, confined the Chinese merchants, the Sanglis, to a ghetto called the Parian. This tension led to bloody uprisings and massacres in 1603 and 1639. If the king had been there, perhaps the history would have been less bloody, or perhaps he would have just been another casualty of the tropics. So, did King Philip visit the Philippines? No, he was too busy battling gout, fighting the Dutch, and hoarding skeletons. The Philippines was his possession, but never his destination. The Manila Galleon wasn't a cruise ship, it was a machine that turned silver into silk and sailors into skeletons. And honestly, looking at the stats of those voyages, I don't blame him for staying in his room. Thank you so much for watching. If you survived this voyage across the Pacific, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel out.